Our first illusion is time travel. It's not 2011. We're not in San Francisco. It's not the Jewish Museum. It's 100 years ago, where there are no cell phones ringing. It's 100 years ago, Edinburgh, Scotland. It's Tuesday, May 9th, 1911, and we're at the Empire Theatre. Now, we're not in a theater that seats 200. We're in a theater that seats 3,000, and it's packed. The stage I'm on is about 16 feet wide, but the stage we're imagining is 100 feet long and at least as deep. And you're all thrilled to be here because you're watching the great Lafayette. I can tell you're all thrilled to be here. I'm serious. Follow along and know that this story and every story I tell you tonight happened just as I explain it. So the great Lafayette, he was a magician, sure, but he was really what's known as a quick change artist. This is an art form that's sadly largely extinct by today's standards. He would begin in an Asian costume and instantly transform into a white suit and cape, and then right before your eyes again transform into a coroner's outfit. It wasn't exactly a magic trick, but it did look pretty magical. And so you're seeing the great Lafayette in his total prime. He was Jewish. He was born Sigmund Neuberger in 1872 in Munich, and he later came to the United States and started touring. But you're seeing him as an A-lister. This, it's hard to compare times then to times now, but think of it as like a Brad Pitt or a George Clooney, a huge name in the world. And you're seeing him in the peak of his prime. He travels with an unprecedented 45-person crew. That's more than any magician today travels with. Some people in the crew had him being nice, others had him being rather eccentric. But they also traveled with 2 horses, a dog named Beauty, and a lion named Prince. And one thing is certain, he was very, very, very kind to his animals. In fact, he was obsessed with his animals. And this obsession, some scholars believe, would later contribute to his untimely demise. So there we are, in his show, and so far you have seen things you can't even believe, right? You've seen amazing things. This isn't a time before movies, talking pictures, modern special effects. So you're seeing things you didn't believe were possible. And then we come to his final piece, The Lion's Bride. It's a big number. It's a play on magic. And it would have a princess on the stage. There would be 2 midgets dressed in mechanical costumes. We don't know what they were there for, but there were midgets in the number. There were 2 guards with spears, and what they are guarding is important. It's a big cage, a metal cage with a lion. That's Prince the Lion's cage. Eyewitnesses put this lion at about 400 pounds. Big mane, ferocious lion. Part of that cage was covered by a canvas tent, and in the background is a big backdrop. There are Asian, Oriental-themed lights, paper housing above to light the stage. And the theme of the act is simple. A shipwrecked princess is forced to choose between wedding an evil pasha or being sacrificed to the lion. Well, her Christian virtues make this an easy decision. She'll be sacrificed to the lion. Just then, Lafayette rides in atop his horse, Arizona, makes a huge entrance. The crowd goes nuts. And then, instantly, they transpose. This is that quick change element I was talking about. Once she's ushered to safety, he, the great Lafayette, will be sacrificed to the lion. He's inched toward the cage, and as he gets near, right on cue, the lion roars. Now let's take a time out. Why is the lion roaring? Well, I'm ashamed to tell you this, but magicians during that time period used a terrible technique. Animal cruelty ran rampant, and the floor of that cage was metal, and it would send an electric shock to that poor Prince the Lion. He was whimpering in pain. He wasn't really growling. It's sad, but that's how that worked. So this is how the act would go every night until tonight. As he neared the cage would burst open. The lion would run out, run past Lafayette, run to the edge of the stage, and just as it was about to jump into the audience and eat you, sir, he would remove his costume, and Lafayette had become the lion. It was an amazing, show-stopping trick, the last trick of the night, but on this night, Tuesday, May 9th, 1911, it would be his last trick ever. Remember the paper housing on the lights I was talking about? One caught fire, quickly spread onto the canvas tent and then onto the backdrop, and within seconds, the entire stage was engulfed in flames. Now, initially, you would have thought this was part of the show. You're seeing things you can't believe. Why not? But then a very wise backstage person cut the fire cable, and that fire cable released a curtain, a fire curtain that came down so fast it came off its tracks and got jammed 3 feet above the stage. Black smoke starts billowing out, and that's your cue to leave. Now, the orchestra up to that time was playing Lohengrin, it's a Wagner piece. And so it's this very dramatic thing, and everybody leaves in good order. But behind the stage, it's a nightmare. You see, Lafayette was obsessed with secrets, just like many of his contemporaries. He was so afraid a magician would come and sabotage his tricks or sketch one of his illusions that he had 3 of the 5 backstage doors illegally locked. A 4th one was blocked by scenery which left just one way in and out. Now, many people on the stage, backstage crew, did get out, and they were seen on the outside. They saw Lafayette on the outside. But he proclaimed that he would go back into the flames to retrieve his beloved horse, Arizona. He never came back out. Inside, it was total chaos. Arizona was spooked, running around. Prince the Lion was running around with his mane on fire, chasing people. And where Prince the Lion died is important. He died right here, blocking the only exit. Authorities later surmised that the people trapped inside had to choose between being burned alive and being eaten alive. Now, when the smoke had cleared, 11 people were dead. A member of the orchestra, both midgets, some of the cast members, Prince the Lion, Arizona the horse, and of course, Lafayette himself. His body was so badly burned that they could only identify it from an ornamental sword he wore with his costume and a turban. What was left of the body was sent to Glasgow for a cremation, or what's left of cremation. And we actually have video from the Edinburgh Library from this time period. It shows not only the people that were there, but some of the rubble. You'll get a better shot of the stage here. Just in a moment, you'll see the stage sort of going from the lower left to the upper right. There you can see what's left of the stage. And of course, what's left of poor Prince the Lion, a pretty gruesome image of his carcass there. But ladies and gentlemen, like any good magic trick, this story has a twist ending. Days after the fire, as they were clearing away the rubble, they discovered a little space beneath the stage, an area almost like a trap door. When they opened it, they were horrified to find Lafayette's body almost entirely unburned, staring at them. Which begs the question, if Lafayette's body was under the stage, who did they bury as Lafayette? Who did they cremate? Well, the answer to this mystery lies in the riddle of the Lion's Bride itself. You see, Lafayette used a body double. That's how he could be in 2 places at once, both in the cage and out of the cage. At the precise moment the fire broke out, we believe Lafayette was in transition beneath the stage. And after the fire broke out, there was nobody there to hear his calls as he was trapped for who knows how long. Now, Lafayette's funeral was international news. 3,000 mourners through the streets of Edinburgh, 60 carts, 3s just for the floral arrangements. And when his good friend Harry Houdini was asked to comment on the death of Lafayette, he said, "Lafayette fooled them in life and in death." Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tragic Magic. It's a strange juxtaposition of theater jargon that to die on stage is the fullest expression of failure, but to kill during a performance is the highest achievement. The history of magic is riddled with stories of death and murder, and I've studied the strange intersection between magic and death, and tonight it's my pleasure to share some of the more interesting stories with you. With equal appreciation, we'll honor the heroes and immortalize the dunces, all of whom lost their lives in magic. We'll look at how and where conjuring went fatally awry and why. And along the way, I want to look at what it is about us as audience members that fascinates the topic of death. Why are we so fascinated with this topic of danger and death? The element of danger is a proven dramatic device, right? Makes a magic show more believable, even relevant. But one must never confuse the illusion of danger with real danger. It's our job as magicians to blur that line between real danger and false danger. But throughout history, magicians have willfully crossed that line, simultaneously attracted to and repelled by the prospect of death. Now, what is it that fascinates magicians about death? First of all, it's impossible. It's dangerous. It's tantalizing in many ways. Magicians love this. But what do we as audience members love about death? Well, deep down, I think that each one of us has a subconscious desire, or primal urge to play God. The ability to take life and restore it is something many of us ponder and ultimately suppress. But the magician personifies these forbidden desires. Think of it this way. He burns and bisects and beheads his assistants without causing them bodily harm. He can't be shot. He can't be drowned. He is here, and then he is not. And we allow the magician to play this role because he's openly playing a role. He's not acting like it's real. After all, we reason it's just a magic trick. But magic tricks do go fatally wrong, and that's what this talk is about. Now, many magicians have had interesting deaths, but we'll limit our talk tonight to just those magicians who were killed in the act of magic or in the act of preparing for magic. So, for example, the famous magician Tommy Cooper died on stage, live on television. Alas, it was his heart that failed him and not a magic trick, so we won't be telling his story. Or Horace Golden, the famous turn-of-the-century magician who died reportedly from the stress of an upcoming performance of magic's most dangerous trick, the bullet catch. But you see, he died with just stress and thoughts of bullets on the brain and not actual bullets buried therein, so we won't tell his story either. Or Oscar Dante Eliason, the famous Australian magician who was shot in the groin while hunting for rabbits. Had he been conjuring with those rabbits instead of hunting them, we would tell his story, but we'll save it. Now, a couple more things. The first one is, as I give this talk tonight, you may have questions, and please, after the talk, I'll be delighted to take your questions, not just on tragic magic, but on the relationship between Judaism and magicians, or on Houdini, or anything else that you would like to ask me on the topic of magic, and I'll try and answer that afterward. And then the second thing is, a couple of these stories can get a bit morose. So if you feel yourself going to a dark place, I want you to think of an image in your mind and bring yourself back, if we can. Just picture that and you should be fine. So let's begin with the most iconic image in all of magic, sawing a woman in half. Now, in all my research, I can't find a single example of sawing a woman in half performance that resulted in harm to either the magician or the assistant. But it's the illusion of danger. It's that perception that what he's doing could cause somebody harm that we love, that we watch, that we relish. And sometimes that is enough to be dangerous. It's 1930, Shawville, Quebec, very small town and an audience full of mostly farmers. For most of those farmers, it would be their first time seeing magic or live entertainment of any kind in the flesh. Now, the Wallace Brothers Circus is in town, and on stage is George Leyland, the magician. And after performing some really cool, amazing tricks, he makes a shocking and startling announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, he says, "I shall now saw through my assistant." He helps her into the box, and this was a shocking thing for most of the people to hear. But I think on some level they did intuit that it was just a show. But for one audience member, Henry Howard, 51 years old, born off the coast of Canada, it was appalling. It was shocking, and he was propelled into action. As George Leyland set up that trick, Henry Howard snuck behind the circus stage, tiptoed onto the stage, rummaged through the magician's props quietly until he found a real sword. As George Leyland held up the saw to begin that illusion, Henry Howard took that sword and ran him through. The audience saw the blade emerge from his abdomen, and he withdrew it. George Leyland collapsed. Now, happily, this is the only tale that I'm going to tell you today in which the magician lived at all. Authorities apprehended Henry Howard and asked him why on earth he would go on stage during a magic show and stab the magician. His answer was naive. He said, quote, "I just couldn't see that man harming that poor girl." I'm reminded of an Alfred Hitchcock subtitle. It says, "The hands that applaud can also kill." And I tell that story now because I hope you enjoy the talk and this thing we're doing tonight. But in the event that you do not, please refrain from sneaking behind me and stabbing me in the back. Now, I want to tell a couple of stories that have to do with the preparation of magic, because a lot of times that's the really dangerous part, the development or the setting up. Put it another way, sometimes magicians play with fire, and other times they get burned, or in the case of Balabrega, blown up. Balabrega was Jewish. He was born with the last name Miller, and in 1868 he came from Sweden to the United States. He toured for a time as the Swedish boy wonder, and he grew into a successful touring magician, as Balabrega was his performing name. Now, our story starts and ends on June 12, 1900, at the Rose Theater in Brazil, and that's where Balabrega was performing that night, and he was performing a pyrotechnic illusion, a beautiful trick, called the Moths and the Flame. And what happened in this trick was a large prop that looked like a huge candle was here, and then 6 beautiful assistants in lace costumes that looked like moths disappeared one by one into the flame. Now, the pyrotechnic part of this illusion required a supply of gas, not something easily available in Central or South America in 1900. So they traveled with acetylene canvas bags, forerunners to compress gas tanks today. Our story is a short one. Balabrega was setting up on his knees on the stage that night. He was working with this acetylene bag. Next to him was Lou Bartlett, assistant that he traveled with. 12 paces away was the theater manager. We don't know what caused the spark, possibly just static electricity, hot day. Something caused a spark, and it literally blew Balabrega to bits. It also killed Lou Bartlett, and 12 paces away from flying debris, it severely injured the theater manager. Balabrega was 42 years old. Thank you very much. I would have done that for you live, but the fire marshal doesn't allow flames in the theater. What you just saw is flash paper. Flash paper has the consistency of tissue paper. You can fold it, you can write on it, but it has some unique properties very interesting to magicians. When it burns hot, and it burns clean, which means it leaves absolutely no ashes. So magicians love it because it's aesthetically very pretty on a stage. It makes a big flash and then it just seems to disappear. It distracts the eye, so it's misdirective. And magicians love the fact that it leaves no residue. And magicians aren't the only ones, by the way, to use flash paper. In the 1920s, Chicago mob bosses used to keep their spreads and their bookie accounts on flash paper. That way, when the cops would raid the joint, a touch of the cigarette, and all the evidence literally disappears into thin air. Now, I tell you about flash paper because there's a story that's pretty close to my heart. I'm from a small town in Canton, Ohio. No magic shops around. So once a month when I was young, my dad would drive me an hour north to Murray's Magic Shop. Murray's Magic Shop was a great old shop, just had one light in the middle of the room, and there was a perpetual cloud of smoke hugging that light because Murray was always smoking. Sold me my first magic props, taught me my first magic lessons, and Murray offered a strange service for his clients. You see, flash paper is so flammable that you can't ship it dry. You have to ship it wet. Then when it arrives, magicians can air it out and use it after a few days. Well, it's kind of inconvenient. So Murray used to ship flash paper dry as a service to his customers. And on March 23rd, 1992, he was on a highway in Cleveland with 3 boxes of flash paper in the back seat of his car. Authorities estimate that to be about 2,000 sheets. In the front seat, he was smoking. Threw the cigarette out the window. In a very unlucky shot, it flew back into the back seat and into one of those boxes, which was kept open so he could fill in the postage cost when he shipped it. The car erupted into flames, and the explosion was so hot that it fused the seatbelt closed. Murray couldn't get out of the car. He had third-degree burns on 80% of his body, and fourth-degree burns, that's down to the muscle tissue, on 20% of his body. He passed away after 60 days. And when this picture arrived on the cover of our newspaper, the Sunday edition, for me, an 11-year-old boy, it was my first experience with death. Can we get another... Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I want to switch gears for a moment. I want everybody in the audience to think of something you fear. It could be something small, like spiders, or something big, like death. Think of something you fear. What's something you fear, sir? Heights.
Tall buildings, yes.
Tall buildings, all right. Very good. Well, just use the exit, don't go up to the upper levels. Very good. And the gentleman here, what's something you fear, sir?
Heights as well, actually.
You were thinking heights as well. Okay, very good. Not a very fearful crowd. I like that. Well, I can tell you my biggest fear. It isn't rational, but as a magician, I think you can understand it. My biggest fear is losing a hand. And about 2 years ago, I very nearly did. I was in a boating accident. I was water skiing and collided in the water at 55 miles an hour with a metal buoy. And it injured the whole left side of my body, but the worst of it was my arm. I broke both bones in my arm in 2 places. 4 of the 7 bones in my wrist were broken, 2 of which were shattered and replaced. You can see the x-ray of my hand. I had a plate, 5 screws, and 2 pins added in. But the worst of it was losing feeling in half of my hand due to ulnar nerve damage. I couldn't feel this part of my hand, and I didn't know that I would ever get it back. For a magician, that's the worst news in the world. But fortunately, the good news is, this great miracle in my life is that after therapy for about a year, I got almost all of it back, and I'm doing everything I was doing beforehand. But the fear remains, that fear of losing a hand. And I believe in confronting my fears head on, which is where this next bit comes into play. What's your name, sir? The second fear of heights, gentlemen? David? You look very trustworthy. Please welcome David to the stage. Come right over here, David. Nice to have you up here.
Nice to meet you.
Your job is very easy. All you have to do is examine a few things for me. First of all, take a look at the blindfold. Make sure it blocks out the light. Oh, he's testing it. Very good. And the hammer. Yeah, look good. And the last thing is the bottle. Take a look at this bottle. Make sure it is everything it appears to be. Just tap. Don't actually break the bottle, but tap it. Made of real glass, yes? Beautiful. David, throughout this trick, a few times, I'm going to ask you to step back to the back of the stage. That's for your own protection. So try that now. Step back to the edge. Very good. Wait there. Meanwhile, I'd like all of you to witness. If you can't see in the back and the front row, they'll keep me honest. Watch the bottle, please. You can hear, you can see. Yeah? Everybody all right? Sounds like a good one. David, we are going to play the most dangerous game of spin the bottle. See, 3 of these bags have nothing under them except a little block of wood. But under one of these bags is the end of my career. I do this effect every night almost. I travel all over the world performing, and truly every time I do this, I get very, very nervous. It has gone wrong once, and I have the scar on my hand to prove it. If you could step forward, please. I want everybody to stare here at David, right in the eyes. Stare at him for about 4 or 5 seconds. Good. And now I'd like everybody to stare into my eyes. Good. And if this gentleman in the orange shirt, if you could just stare at me. I don't want anybody following that bottle. You tried, and that was good. I applaud you for it. To keep me honest, I'll place the blindfold on in this way. David, if you could take my hand, take by the wrist, and guide me over to the table. Good. And place my hand above the tray, but right in the middle. Is it right in the middle? Yeah, good. And if you could please go back to the back of the stage there. Ladies and gentlemen, if I perform a card trick incorrectly, the worst thing that happens is I get no applause. But this, if I find the wrong bag, ends my career instantly. That's one down. All right. David, if you could please take my wrist again. I would like you to place my hand directly over a bag that you think is safe. Is it directly over a bag? Yes. David, if you could please step back. It's directly over, yeah? That's 2 down. And now, it's your turn. I'm kidding, of course, but I do want you, and by extension everybody in the audience, to understand what it's like to go through this. I can't explain to you why I do this every night, but I can make you feel what it is that I feel. And it's in a totally safe way. I promise no harm will come of it. All I ask that you do is hold out your hand like this, tuck your thumb under your palm, and place your hand on top of mine. Perfect. I'll place my hand on top. And we'll go this way. You'll be right there, but nothing will happen to you
Okay.
that doesn't happen to me first. I'm going to let you lead the way back and forth. And at some point, I want you to just stop on either of the bags. 50-50 to you. This is my livelihood. You sure you don't want to change your mind?
I'm okay.
Are you sure?
I don't know.
Okay. Keep your hand right there. Ladies and gentlemen, please give David a big round of applause. Thank you so much for helping. I have survived, and so the show will go on. Our next story takes place in 1898 in New York. It concerns William Ellsworth Robinson, a great magician who is at this time broke. Robinson traveled with some of the greatest magicians of his day, but he had failed to ignite that spark in his own career. Out of desperation, because he had a wife, he had children, he did what no magician wants to do: copy another act. You see, at the time, all the rage on vaudeville were these Asian acts, oriental themes, beautiful costumes, colorful magic, and the biggest magician on that circuit was Chung Ling Soo, a Chinese magician. He spoke almost no English. He walked out hunched over and performed amazing miracles before the audiences of Europe and America. So Robinson copied Chung Ling Soo and became the similar but nonsensical Chung Ling Soo. He shaved his head, he put grease paint on, he got an Asian costume, Asian props, and his show was really great. So he was as surprised as everybody else when he became an overnight sensation. All of a sudden, he was in demand all over the world as Chung Ling Soo. But now we have one of the most unique problems in American theater history. We have a man who became famous for being somebody he was not. Remember, he couldn't just not speak English on stage. He also had to be Chung Ling Soo backstage for the crew. He had to be Chung Ling Soo when he checked into and out of every hotel. He had to become this person he was, and he became isolated because he couldn't speak English to anyone. Even when he gave interviews to journalists, he would bring along a crew member. He would speak gibberish to the crew member, and the crew member would talk to the journalist and answer the questions. It was an isolating sort of experience, and it was a life of deception. That life of deception was cut abruptly short in 1918 on a theater stage in London. He was performing magic's most dangerous trick, the bullet catch, which he called prophetically, condemned to death by the boxers. Now, 13 people that we know of have been killed by the bullet catch trick. But I'm going to tell you this story because I think it says the most about how we view death as an audience. The first person killed was in the 1600s. The most recent was in 2005 in Ghana. But this is the one I'm going to tell you because I think it says the most. And I am going to tell you how Chung Ling Soo performed this trick. Not to expose, but so that you can fully understand what went wrong. So, this is how the illusion would happen. Chung Ling Soo would stand on one side of the stage with a plate as if he was about to absorb this bullet as it was fired. Soo Sin, his Asian assistant, would come into the audience and have somebody in the audience select a bullet. 2 bullets, actually. They were then marked with a knife. They would be scratched. One was usually scratched with an X, one was scratched with a little line through it. As Soo Sin came back to the stage, she would secretly switch it for 2 pre-marked bullets. Duplicates of these pre-marked bullets were on Chung Ling Soo's person in his costume on the other side of the stage. Now Soo Sin could show those bullets around. Once they had been switched, they have those markings of an X and a line through them, and now it was loaded into 2 guns. Now, the guns themselves were gaffed. They couldn't fire. Instead, they were blocked. The red arrow points to where they were blocked so that the flint could not get to the chamber of the gun and ignite it. Instead, when the guns fired, it would be a loud noise through the ramrod tube, but no actual bullet. So on that night, in March 1918, on that stage in London, the 2 marksmen aimed at Chung Ling Soo's chest, cocked back, and fired. Immediately, the crew knew something was wrong. Why? Because of the sound. It didn't sound like a bullet went off. Instead, it sounded like a real bullet was fired. Not blanks had gone off, a real bullet. And indeed it had. Chung Ling Soo was on the other side of the stage, grasping his chest. Blood was coming out. "My God," he said, "something's happened. Lower the curtain." And he collapsed. He died 4 hours later. Now, as shocking as it would be to see a man shot on stage before your very eyes, as shocking as it would be to see an A-list celebrity, a big name, die, it was equally shocking to hear him speaking English. Remember, the masquerade was total and complete. People thought he was from China. When it came out that he had a white wife, that he had children, that he wasn't Chinese at all, it was huge news all over the world. Now, focus quickly shifted to how he died. Bullet went into his chest, grazed his heart, exited his back, and lodged in the theater walls. Where did the bullet come from? From the guns. But why were they fired? Well, the first suspect was Soo Sin, his Asian assistant. She wasn't really Asian. She was Caucasian. Her name was Dot, and she was his wife. Now, if you're looking for a motive, look no further, because Dot was his wife, but his estranged wife, not the mother of his children. He kept her on the payroll and still traveled with her, although he had a family elsewhere. Now, some people thought it was suicide. Robinson had spoken just days before about money troubles, about how he was growing tired of living this life of deception, and maybe this was his big swan song. And they got an anonymous letter from a crew member accused somebody else of killing him. But the person who solved the riddle was a forensics expert. Forensics expert examined the guns and took them apart, and what he learned was this. Slowly, after years of performing, the gunpowder had been wearing away at the metal wall between the chamber of the gun and the ramrod tube. And on this night, a tiny spark passed from the ramrod tube into the barrel of the gun, past the point where it was plugged, and allowed the gun to be fired. And that is the riddle of one of the greatest magicians in history, Chung Ling Soo. Which, of course, brings us to the namesake of the wonderful exhibition you've no doubt seen by now, Harry Houdini. Houdini, as you know, was Jewish, born Eric Weiss, the son of a sometime rabbi, sometime mohel, and Houdini was famous. It's impossible to overstate Houdini's fame. He really was America's first superstar. Many people think they know about Houdini. Some people know that Houdini was not well liked by his peers as a magician. His skills weren't very well respected by other magicians. In fact, he was better known to the public as an escape artist than a magician. Now, I think Houdini's most brilliant revelation was this. People don't come out by the thousands to watch Houdini do magic. They come out by the thousands to watch Houdini survive. Now, a lot of people think that they know about Houdini's escapes, and some do and some don't, but nobody knows how he did all of his escapes. Houdini used to do these big escapes, bridge jumps, underwater escapes, to publicize the shows that you could then come to. But in 1908, he debuted a wonderful illusion/escape called the milk can escape. They have Houdini's milk can upstairs in the exhibit, and I encourage you all to examine it very carefully. It was a simple illusion in appearance. It was a milk can or a large can, and he would get inside. It was filled with water, so only his head emerged, and then he would bring out what he called the world's largest stopwatch. This shows you what a brilliant marketer Houdini was, a brilliant presenter, which is so important in magic. He would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, I must warm up my lungs, so please, all together with me, hold your breath for 1 minute. And I will ask all of you here tonight in this theater with me to hold your breath for a minute starting now." Hold that thought. Houdini would submerge into the can. He would hold his breath for a minute, and after a minute, an assistant would kick the can. He would come up, no worse for the wear, but he did something very important. He showed the audience that what he was doing wasn't impossible. It was very real, and not only very real, but very difficult. We're losing about half of you so far. All right, everybody stop holding their breath. I don't want anybody to pass out in the middle of my show. But do you understand how brilliant this was? This was allowing each person from their seats to experience just how real the illusion was. Now he had everybody's attention, and he would meditate for a moment, and then he said, "I shall now endeavor to hold my breath for much longer." He resubmerged. The lid was placed on top, then 6 assistants came and locked 6 padlocks. A curtain was placed around the can, and they ushered off stage. The reason for the curtain was they wanted to protect the secret of Houdini's escape. The clock was ticking. Everybody held their breath along with Houdini, or at least they tried to. After a minute, most people couldn't hold their breath. After 2 minutes, even the skeptics were scared. At the 3-minute mark, the stage manager came on stage holding an axe, looking very confused, like something had gone terribly wrong. Now, Now, Houdini's a brilliant marketer. It worked this way every night. It was like a play. He's looking very confused. At the 4-minute mark, everybody in the audience is shouting, "Mercy, mercy, let him out, free Houdini." And just as he pulls that axe back to chop through it and rescue Houdini, in the nick of time, Houdini emerges, soaking wet, out of breath, to thunderous applause. The crowd loved this effect. Then he would whip away the curtain, and the milk can was still locked. It was as if he melted right through the side. And indeed, that's what some spiritualists thought of that illusion. They thought he possessed supernatural powers. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was fooled into thinking that this was somehow real. Now, in all of my research, there's no evidence Houdini was ever injured doing the milk can escape. But I cannot say the same thing about one of his imitators, a man named Genesta. In 1930, 4 years after Houdini's death, Genesta was performing his own version of the milk can escape. Now, we don't know how Houdini did it. We still don't know. But we do know how Genesta did it. Genesta used a trick can. He would come up through the lid of the can. Even after it was locked, there was a trap door that would allow him to escape through the top. But what Genesta didn't know is that his crew had dropped the milk can as they unloaded it, denting the lid and preventing that escape hatch from opening. It wasn't until Genesta was inside, underwater, holding his breath, locked by 6 padlocks, that he realized he was trapped. There was no signal. There was no way for him to shout. He was trapped. It took his wife, waiting in the wings, 3 minutes before she realized something had gone wrong. She encouraged the assistants to come out and unlock the padlocks, but of course, they never had to unlock them before, because usually when you perform the trick, you don't need to. They couldn't remember which keys went to which locks, and they lost another precious minute. And it was too late. By the time they unlocked all the padlocks, opened the lid, Genesta lived just long enough for somebody to explain to him what had happened. So we come back to Houdini. Despite Houdini's obsession with life and death, it wasn't his own obsession that led to his demise, but an audience member's. Houdini was America's first superstar. He was enormously famous. But at this point in his life, he was middle-aged. He was tired. He was mentally and physically exhausted. He was mentally exhausted because his wife, the love of his life, Bess, was in a hospital far away, and he wanted to be with her. She was sick. He was physically exhausted because he had an ankle injury from a previous performance that made it excruciatingly painful for him to give shows. So after a show one night in Montreal, he was backstage, very tired, and he was being sketched. His likeness was being sketched by a student at nearby McGill University, a Jewish student named Smilovich. And Smilovich was sketching him as they chatted, and then in walked another student from McGill University, J. Gordon Whitehead. J. Gordon Whitehead was about 32 years old. He was 6'4", a little bit taller than me, and just so you can get a size differential, Houdini was 5'3", so you can see there's a huge difference in the size of these men. They began to talk. Houdini was, of course, boasting about his muscles, asked the young students to feel his bicep and then his forearm, and explained that this was where you had to have muscle to escape. And then the conversation turned, and J. Gordon Whitehead said, "Mr. Houdini, is it true you can absorb any blow above the waist?" And indeed, Houdini used to boast about this. He used to allow people to punch him in the stomach to prove his abdominal superiority. But on this night, before Houdini could even answer, as he turned to the right to look at J. Gordon Whitehead, he started to stand up, and he was met by J. Gordon Whitehead's fist, who gave him 3 severe blows to the stomach. Houdini was totally unprepared for it. Eyewitnesses then have J. Gordon Whitehead continuing to punch him for several successive blows until Houdini was on the ground, on his knees, saying, "That's quite enough," as he coughed. Now, we would later learn that Houdini was suffering from appendicitis. It was only a matter of time before his appendix would rupture. Many scholars believe that that trauma to the stomach caused that appendix to rupture on the spot. But of course, Houdini was a proud man, and he didn't seek medical attention. But 4 days later, on a stage in Detroit, with a temperature of 104 degrees, he collapsed. He was taken to a nearby hospital where he engaged in a now mythic conversation with his surgeon, a man named Dr. Kennedy. Now, whether or not the conversation happened exactly like this or not, I think this says the most about what Houdini thought about his own mortality and his career. You know, he said weakly, pulling the doctor close to his bed, I always wanted to be a doctor. I just never could. I've always regretted that. Why, Mr. Houdini, Dr. Kennedy said, that is the most absurd thing I've heard today. Here you are, the greatest magician and entertainer of your time. You make untold thousands happy. You make a fabulous income, and I am just an ordinary dub of a surgeon eking my way through life. That may be true, Houdini said, but you actually do things for people, while I, in almost every respect, am a fake. Houdini died that night, Halloween, 1926. Now, Houdini had this unbelievable talent for fusing the mysterious with the dangerous. And I think that the best example of that is in a very intimate trick that he made famous. Now, you almost never see this trick performed today because it is legitimately very, very dangerous. But I've worked with a physician who has cleared me for it. I have not eaten all day, and I have filled my stomach with almost a gallon of water. He called it simply the needles. And you can look upstairs at Houdini's needles that they have on display. I have 20 stainless steel needles. Would you please carefully take that needle? It's brand new. Would you please just test, please don't prick yourself, but make sure that it is sharp. Ma'am, would you please take that needle in your hand and examine it for me? Verify for the rest of the audience that it is sharp. Okay? Sir, you're going to have to be the eyes of the audience. I want you to verify that when I place that needle on my tongue, it does not stay in my hand, that it stays on my tongue. They will hear you when you say yes. Look inside, under the tongue. Gone.
I think so.
Thank you very much. That's 2 down, 18 to go. All 18 together. Look inside.
Nothing there.
That is the first part, the easy part. But Houdini never stopped there. At this moment, he would begin the second part. Oh, it's okay. One more. Thank you. So what is the magician's fascination with death? Well, since the beginning of history, magicians have chosen their material based on the audience's aesthetic. It's the reason we pull cute, furry bunny rabbits out of hats instead of ugly cockroaches. It's because that's what you want to see. The reason, then, that magic history has been so dangerous, and magic today remains dangerous, is because of you. It all boils down to this. The greatest magicians cheat death. The rest die trying. But two constants remain. Death makes for a great story, but so does survival. Thank you.